And let's take a pause a little bit today and try to use the sun chart, or the star chart here, and look at some of the things that we have been discussing, because we've had tremendous things occur over the past month, 2 months, that we have tracked with basically on identifying with the symbol that you see here. The 8 planets have been discovered, and you know, it's amazing. What amazes to me is that the scientific community is really going berserk over this, and yet people walking back and forth or going about their business every day haven't any idea what's going on. They have no idea that for the first time in the history of the universe, 8 planets have been found with revolving around suns exactly like this one. And more amazingly, as we have tracked this, we found that each of the discoveries correspond in the same order that the scriptures and ancient documents had placed in the book of Revelation and other places. So, I mean, you know, that's a significant thing. Last week, as we begun to talk about the 7 seals in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, and what they mean, and we started talking about opening those seals and describing, you know, what's being said, what's being discussed. And remember, we ran into the strong angel, and then the Lion of Judah, and which are all basically religious terms, and the Lamb. And then as we looked at all of this stuff, we started to realize that each one of these things not only had astronomical implications, but they had anatomical, bodily implications. And we began to see the, for instance, meaning of the word angel to actually be angle. And what I'll show you today, that everything in the universe that affects us on the earth is based on angles. The angle of the sun, the reflections of light, the reflections of electromagnetic fields that impact on your brain. They impacted everything. The photosynthesis from the sky impacts on flowers. The energy from the sky impacts on the ocean. And somehow we have been raised by people who have isolated us as if all of these things can't affect us. Well, what's this silly? But now science is finding out that it does. So we started to understand these things. We started to understand about the Lion of Judah. When we checked the Bible and we found Judah is on the right side in the positioning in the desert. And the lion is the sun, which is Leo. And so then we realized that the Lion of Judah is when the sun energy moves into the right side, when we pass over from winter to spring. And in your body, when the sun energy moves out of the solar plexus to the right hemisphere of the brain, then the Lion of Judah is the one who opens the seal. So we broke all of this code, and each of us started to understand these things. And then we learned about the lamb. And we learned the lamb is Aries, the lamb or the ram. And when the lion lays down with the lamb, there's peace, because when the sun enters Aries, there's springtime. When the sun consumes Aries, the fire consumes the ram, and Passover takes place. So all of these things are variations on the same theme, variations on the theme of the sun moving upwards and entering into Aries, and then sitting in the northern hemisphere in the eastern sky, or the solar plexus energy moving upwards, hitting the pineal gland and moving over to the right hemisphere of the brain. And we broke the code on all of this stuff. I was watching a fella the other night on television, and he was talking about evolution, and you know, he was talking from a Christian perspective, and he was very knowledgeable. He was talking about Cro-Magnon and Homo erectus and all of these ancient bones that they found. And he was looking at the Y chromosome, proving that, you know, he didn't feel that the Darwinian theory, in particular man evolving out of these types of subspecies, was correct. But see, they're looking in the wrong place. Certainly, you know, people did not evolve out of animals or apes. That's silly. And because it's easier for nature to make a person than it is to evolve one out of an ape. But, on the other hand, as you begin to understand this, when you look at where did you really come from? Where did the human species come from? And did the human species originate on Earth? Now you got a whole different thing. And do your ancestors live someplace else a little further away? And nobody has ever really given so much thought to that. And for the most part, the people who have been our teachers and our mentors can't deal with this. And so, we've never really been able to challenge ourselves to really start looking at the origin of things. But we're starting to see, as we look at these documents, that these documents were all written by a race who were far advanced beyond where we're at, and who talked in strange symbolic terms and so forth. So all of this is part of our study of a moving universe. And in our movement in harmony with this universe. The lion being the solar plexus energy, the lamb being the pineal gland of the brain, Judah being the right side, the angel being the angled. So we understand these things. And being understanding of them, we now have a more appreciative look at the house that we live in, the universal house. Most people have no idea of these things, and it's just like, it's like if you went home to your house and didn't know where the bathroom was. I don't know. How many bedrooms do you have? I don't know. And that's exactly what most people do, because you live in this universal house and they don't have any idea where anything is, how it works, what it does. And then they wonder why they get sick and why there's all of this kind of conflict, because, they're living in a place where they've never been allowed to explore or find out about. So we looked at the map and the star map, and we started to trace. I don't know if you've ever... Let me just show you something. Well, I'll get to it a little later. I don't want to jump. But what we did, basically, we traced our star map, and we understand that this is the point of spring here at the spring equinox. And we realized that the sun, went through the cross down here, and then 3 days and 3 nights in the tomb on the solstice, and then ascended up here to Aries, the lamb, so that spring could come and we'd run into the summer. And we talked in these terms and we understood this together. And this happens every year, happens all the time. But something came to me last Sunday, and when it does, immediately it sends me into the closet to start to meditate and think. Mike Roscoe come up here, and Mike was talking. He said, I've got a problem with this. And I says, okay. And in the old days, I would immediately try to think up ways that I can combat to make sure that it comes off that I'm right, everybody else is. And, well, that's the natural way you do things. You always want to justify your position. But what he said to me, and when people come up to me and tell me things like this, I realize that this is the way God, universe, whatever you want to call it, has of correcting our course and making sure that we're all really tuned into what's going on. Because I send you out of here and you get into conversations with people and you start telling them this, and you say, well, I know how this all works, because the sun, goes through the cross, and then it goes into the tomb with the solstice, and then the sun ascends up to Aries, and then somebody looks you in the face and says, well, I can prove you're wrong. You say, well, how? Because the sun doesn't move at all. Now you're thrown for a loop. And you would get so flustered then, all of the other things, you would be concentrating on what am I going to say about the sun, and they're going to start throwing you all kinds of curves about all the other things. Before you know it, you got your tail between your legs and you don't know what to do. And so Mike raised this question. Universally, every book you pick up, every astronomical book, the encyclopedias, they talk about the pathway of the sun and the movement of the sun into the various signs of the zodiac, through the constellations and all of these things. And this is the way it's given to us. And yet the fact is that Mike is absolutely right. The sun doesn't move. You see. But of course, but in essence, we knew this too. You remember when we talked about Galileo? Galileo got in a lot of trouble with the church because he said to the church, hey, church, you're wrong. It's not the sun that's moving around the earth, it's the earth that's moving around the sun. They put the guy in jail. So in discussing all of this, you know, we want to take a look at things. We want to take a look at the evidences. And as always it happens, when somebody tells me something and I go drifting off then having to into meditation and start looking, something else is discovered. And I'm going to share something with you to walk out the door with today that to me is probably one of the most mind-boggling things that you and I have ever seen. And you'll have it. I've copied it for you so that you have it in your hand. So this important question here then leads us to new discoveries. But let's start considering all of this so that we understand what's going on. When we say the sun does not move, that's not true. But it is. Everything moves. Everything is in a constant state of motion. The sun moves, the earth moves, the planets move, the star moves, the equinox moves. Everything moves. Everything is in a constant state, mostly, for the most part, circular motion. The sun moves at a speed of 13 miles per second, which means it would take it about 2 minutes to get from here to Miami. But when the sun is moving, everything else is moving with it. See? So the sun's moving at 13 miles per second, 45,000 miles an hour. And as it's moving at 13 miles a second, 45,000 miles an hour, we're spinning around it. We're going around it, and at the same time we're going around it, we're spinning around it. So we're going this way and going that way, and then all the other planets, they're spinning around it and going this way and that way, and the stars are spinning, and everything's spinning, and, you know, everything is rotating and revolving. The sun travels around the center of our galaxy. Get this, I love this line, once every 200 million years. Every 200 million years. Okay. Once every 200 million years. And at the galaxy rate, it's 500,000 miles an hour. And the galaxy appears to have 4 spiral arms going out, and the sun lies between the arms of Sagittarius and the arms of Perseus. All of this stuff is not going to mean anything necessarily to you until we get to the point of what I just want you to have firmly tacked in your mind is basically how this works. I am not an astrologer. I am not an astronomer. I am not a scientist. I know nothing about quantum physics. Yet we discuss all of these things, and we have all the answers. So, you know, you figure that one out. But that's nonetheless the way it is. One of the things as I was searching through this that I really found interesting, and I found this and downloaded it off the internet, is that the astronomers believe there's a massive collection of galaxies beyond the cluster of our local galaxy. And this mysterious galaxy is known as the Great Attractor because it's pulling everything towards it, but nobody knows where it is. Is this wild? I just threw that in. So let us see if we can understand what this is all about. Wasn't there a song like that? Oh, yes, I'm the Great Attractor. Wasn't that? Okay. 2 things that you want to, what I'd like you to keep in mind as we discuss this. 1, consciousness, the mind, and 2, angels, or as we've gotten to know them, angles. Keep those 2 things in mind. And the document that I give you to take home with you today is extremely significant. And the document that you'll take home with you today comes from the Goddard Space Laboratory in Greenbelt, Maryland. That's about as good as I could get, which I think is pretty good. Now, the sun, although it doesn't move, is always considered as moving. There is a path that encompasses the sun, the earth, the planets in our particular solar system, and the 12 signs of the zodiac, and the path is called the ecliptic, E-C-L-I-P-T-I-C, the ecliptic. If you look at this chart here, and it's probably very difficult for you to see, but there is a dotted line going all the way around here. Can you see that dotted line? That's the ecliptic. That's what scientists call the path of the sun. And if you were to talk in general terms, you would say that the Earth travels the path of the sun, the Earth travels the ecliptic, and there are 12 signs of the zodiac position, and so that's how we find out the sun is moving into this, moving into that, and so the other thing. Now there's another line here which is very important, because the sun will be in a different sign every month, and there's 12 months and there's 12 signs. That's why you have 12 months in a year, because of the 12 signs, vice versa. There is another very important thing, because you get into an age. Right now you're moving from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. That is based on what is called the celestial equator. This red line here is the celestial equator. And what that means, that every time the sun crosses, the point that it crosses this particular equator, whatever sign it's in. Now, the sun loses 1 degree of positioning every 71 years, so that it stays in a particular sign at the celestial equator for about 2,130 years, about 2,100 years. It'll be in that particular sign. All right? So you have two things, and you have the celestial equator, which tells you what age it is when the sun crosses that particular celestial equator, and you have the ecliptic, which, you know, you have the basically the monthly planets or astrological signs. When you talk about, you know, it's interesting, when you talk about the sun not moving, which it doesn't, and yet in 1990, NASA said that in 1990 Pioneer 11 was heading in the same direction that the sun moves through interstellar space. So, you know, everything is in a constant state of moving. I don't want you to think it's not, but I want you to be clear on how this is read. Grollier's encyclopedia says the yearly path of the sun across the celestial sphere is a great circle called the ecliptic. So they're talking about the path of the sun. Now, the sun rotates, the planets rotate, the universe rotates, the planets orbit around the sun while everything else is turning. So it becomes an extremely complex thing. And to try to understand it, you know, it's like, I guess Lao Tzu says, the closer you get to understanding it, the further away you get to understanding anything. I mean, you realize that, you know, you can't. In fact, the stars move. So how do you tell where the sun is in position to the stars? You know what you have to do? You have to wait for an eclipse. You have to wait. That's how they tell where the stars are in relation to the sun. They wait for an eclipse of the sun, and then they can see the stars. Otherwise, you can't see them. One of the very interesting things about discovering the 8 planets that the scientists have done, which is, you know, confirmed or is lined up with all of the prophecies in the book of Revelation, what they looked for was a sun star that is exactly like ours. And there are stars, suns like ours. But now they have the equipment that they can measure the wobble, which shows that there is something, because you can't see the planet because of the brightness of the sun star. But they have the equipment. In other words, these things have always been there. It's not that they just happen, but we have just evolved to the point where we can start understanding this stuff. That's why when you go back in the Bible and it talks about the speed of light, or they give you the anatomical description of the human brain, or when they talk about, you know, the atom, removing an electron from an atom, and all of these scientific things, when you see that, you say, well, God, who wrote this stuff? You know, where does this come from? Well, this was placed there for a point when you got to, or when Earth, or when people on the Earth got to a point evolved where they could start to understand these things. Don't forget, up to 100 years ago, this Earth was a blur. I mean, you go back about 200 years and you got everybody with candles. When I was a kid, I remember we used to live in houses, and they used to have gas lamps coming out of the wall. I'm telling you the truth. I don't want to say that, you know, only being 35, you know, that wasn't long ago. But they used to have about this height a thing that looked like a candle, only it was metal. And I had a little thing. Can you imagine this? You wonder why they all blew up. And you light it. You'd get a match, and this thing would come out, and it would stink, and all this stuff, and this was it. Now, so what did they have, say, even before my time? I mean, if that's what... I mean, so when you go back, you find out that how old is the Earth? Billions of years old. And it was absolutely nothing but a blur till about 100 years ago. And then all of a sudden, what happened? Angels came, angels came, and the brain started understanding. Everything that's been discovered has been discovered within the last 100 years. Before that, nothing. quill pens and horses and what else? And now all of a sudden, and this is just the beginning. We're just entering into Aquarius. So, like what the scientists said when they're discovering these planets, that we haven't found the one yet that we're looking for that's like Earth, but he said we're very close to it and we're going to find it. Certainly they will. Certainly will, because we're evolving to such a point in this Aquarian age. See? So, let's start to take a look, and so we understand. The Earth travels around the Sun one time in 365 days. I see people writing that down as if you didn't know that. Well, you know, that's a year, okay? As it does, it rotates in the cycle of, you know, see, as it's going around, it's turning. So you've got part of it is nighttime, part of it is daytime, you know. Now, Venus orbits in 224 days. The year in Venus is 224 days, not 365. Uranus takes 84 years. So 1 year on Uranus is 84 years to get around the Sun one time, okay? So the Sun appears, to us, the Sun appears to the Earth to revolve in a circle once every 24 hours, but the rotation of stars and planets differ. Now, let me give you an idea of what, basically, so you can simply get an idea of how this works. Remember, everything is moving, everything is rotating. You have the Sun, and then you have all the planets, and you have the Earth, and they're rotating around this, and all this stuff is moving. Now, well, they're rotating at the same time they're revolving. Yes, okay. They revolve and rotate. Okay, all right. Now, what happens here then is, now this is the point you get to who did this. Somebody laid out as if you would take wallpaper and made a globe around the ecliptic. And on this wallpaper were all pictures. And they had a picture of a crab. And they had a picture of a man with a bow and a horse and all of these things. And a man with a pitcher of water and all of these things. So then this is how this works. As the Earth moves around the Sun, and all of the other planets move, when you would look from the Earth to the Sun, because of the picture that was behind it, would appear to be in a particular sign. Then when the Sun got over, or the Earth got over here, and you would look, the Sun would appear to be in a different sign. Or as the Earth was over here, and now all the while everything else is moving. And so what is it all based on then? It's all based on angles. It is an angle of light. Okay? And so what you'll read, if you read most of the encyclopedias and astronomical books, you'll see, they'll always say the apparent pathway of the Sun. Because the Sun is appearing. Although the Sun does move, and the Sun will, be 1 degree behind. In other words, where the Sun is today, next year at this time, it'll be 1 degree behind where it is today. So, I mean, it gets extremely complex, and it is not easy, and you got all the other planets and so forth and so on. But this is basically what it is. Now, the ecliptic has, as if you would, this design laid around it, so that when you would look from the position where the Earth is, and you look at the Sun appears to be in a particular sign. And so the angle of that appearance. So then somebody knew, so this is the interesting part, somebody knew that the particular angle that you would be in at that particular time would then be best described by the picture of this particular sign, whatever it may be, because it's going to have an effect on you and me because of the angle. The electromagnetic fields and the light and so forth and so on would have this effect. Now, the rotation of the stars and the planets differ from the rotation and the movement of the Earth. They move at, now it gets a little complicated, you don't write this down, don't worry, but they move at 1/12th part of the circular orbit in the time that the Earth travels around in 30 days. In other words, the time that it takes the Earth to go around the Sun in 30 days, the other planets move 1/12 of that. And so what happens, the whole circle then gets divided up into 12 parts. And the sun then appears to be in a different part of the 12 every month, every 30 days. Okay? That's how that works. So the whole circle is divided up into that 12 parts, and that area there is called the ecliptic. So the zodiacs are pictures or signs, and they're put in the sky around the path of the earth. You know, so then we are able to look and say, this angle that we're in this month corresponds to this particular picture and sign. And people who were born when the angle of electromagnetism was impacting on the brain are going to have these characteristics. And whether you believe that or whether, you know, that's not my job. Okay? So the pictures as a backdrop against the planetary movement or the star movement and the earth movement give us a different picture. Now, besides the monthly difference, there's an annual difference, and this is what I was talking to you about. At the end of the 12 months, see, in other words, if you have the circle here, and by the movement of the earth now, the trajectory of the earth, at the end of the 12 months, the sun would be at the equator here. Next year, when you come around, the sun will be 1 degree. It won't be here. It'll be here. And so then you know, that's how it stays in a particular sign. So it takes the sun then, because it loses a degree every 71 days, it takes the sun 25,575 years to make the entire circle by the trajectory of the earth. And it's called, you know what that's called? That's called the precession of the equinoxes. And at the same time that the sun is coming across and the equinoxes are all moving westward. So everything is moving. So it gets complex, but you know what I want out of this, and I really appreciate Mike calling it to my attention, I want you to be able to go up and say, you know, through the movement of the earth, there is an apparent position of the sun in the 12 various zodiacal signs. Now remember something too, it's very interesting. You look at constellations, and when you have the sun in the particular sign, Aries or Virgo, it is not necessarily going to be in that constellation. Okay? So the angle was based on the zodiac, not necessarily on the constellation. The two are not going to line up, and they're not going to be compatible. So then, just lastly, the sun then would stay in a particular sign, because if it loses a degree as it's crossing the celestial equator, it'll stay in that particular sign for about 2,100 years. Now, we're just going into Aquarius, so that's why it's going to be about another 22,000 years before it gets out of whatever it takes. So the entire ecliptic, if you can see the dotted line, crosses, see right there, it's crossing the equator right here. And then as the Earth positions itself, wherever it crosses the particular point of the equator, that's the sign or the age that we're in. Now we're in the age of Aquarius. That's where it's crossing. So remember something then. The sun is centered. Everything moving around it places the angle from the earth to the sun in a different sign or a different picture. And it's not just the earth and the sun, it's the earth and the sun and the planets and the equinoxes and the rotation of it. And the sun is rotating and the earth is rotating and everything's moving and going this way and that way. And it becomes extremely complex, but to know that it is the movement of the earth which gives us apparent positioning of the sun in a particular sign sets up the angle, which then sets up the zodiacal implications. So the appearance of the sun in a sign is by the orbit and relation of the earth and the other planets. Okay, so now you and I have to ask something. It is extremely complex. Who put the wallpaper up here? I mean, who drew the pictures? What are they for? I mean, why not just have the sky up there? In other words, we could get rid of all of these pictures and just put stars there. And who put the pictures in there? And this is where we come in with this business. You know, this is extremely, I mean, it's extremely scientific. It's extremely deep. It's extremely hard to understand, and we've just skimmed the surface of it. But now we know that this whole thing. Now, don't forget somebody that lives on, NGC 36 in a star somewhere in the other galaxy, the Virgo cluster, is not going to see this. They're going to have a whole different set for them. This is for the Earth. This is for Earth people. So who did this? I mean, it's just mind. I mean, could somebody who's a sheep herder have written about a nuclear fission in the Adam and Eve story? I don't think so. That removing a rib from Adam was actually taking an electron from an atom? I don't think that the sheep herder would know that. Could somebody have said that the children of light, the tribe of Judah, has 186,400 people in it, which is the speed of light? I don't think a sheep herder would know that. Could somebody have said, look, you make the tabernacle with an outer court, an inner court, and you separate the two by the veil, which is the anatomically correct description of the human brain? I don't think that that's possible. Could a sheep herder from so many years ago have given, say, I'm going to call this place Peniel because I've seen God? So who did all of this stuff? And this is why we come here, and this is why you're sitting here Sunday morning. Here we got a lecture. You're looking at a lecture from somebody who doesn't know what the heck he's talking about, that's coming out not too bad about all of this stuff in the universe and so forth and so on. And why? So, what are we doing this for? Okay. I want you to take one of these, which is called the Bible. And I want you to open it, and I want you to go to the very first page, page 1. Because let's now, you know, do you understand now that it is the earth moving around the sun which causes the appearance of the sun being in a particular sign? You understand that? That it is not the sun. But look at the implications of this. Stop for a minute. The earth is who? You and me. The sun in us is the solar plexus energy. What happens? If the earth doesn't move, the sun can't move into the sign, can it? See what the implications are for us now. If we don't move on this, then the sun cannot go into the pineal gland, can it? Because the sun is not going anywhere, is it? The sun is showing up there because the earth has made it possible for the sun to be in that sign. So you make it possible then for the sun to be in the pineal, to be in the right side, to be in Aries by your movement. You move off of the dime. You say, I'm going to do this. Because basically, if the earth could talk, the earth could say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to spin around because I want spring to come. So I'm going to move, and the sun is going to wind up and so forth and so on, and spring comes. So the earth has to move. You and I have to move, or this isn't going to work. You can read about this. You can go and download things off the net and all that kind of business, but it's not going to help you unless you actually move and cause the sun to rise from down here to up here. So let's find out who did all this, because it's very interesting. The very first page of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verse 14. Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night. This is planets and stars. Let them be for signs. Well, wait a minute here. In other words, the Bible did that. So whoever wrote the first page of the Bible did this. Set all of these things up in the sky to be for signs. Everything that we've been talking about this morning. It wasn't set up by an astronomer. It was set up by God, for lack of a better word. Let them be for signs. Now, let's take a look here. Come with me for just a minute. Look what we got here. Look what we got here. We've got Coronis Borealis, we got Hercules, we got Serpens Kappa, we got Virgo, we got Leo, we've got Hydra, we've got Gemini, we've got all of these different things. Look at all of these things. We got Ursa Minor, we got Draco, we got Ursa Major, we got all of these things. And now the second thing we've got to find out is when they put the wallpaper up there, who put all of these names there? And how many do we know? How many should we have in here? Is this the right number to have in here, or should we have more? Or should we have less? Do you think this will work? Do you know? No, you don't know. I don't know. So who knows? I'll show you who knows. Page 539. Look at the book of Psalms. 539, in the book of Psalms, and Psalm 147. Psalm 147. So first of all, we found out that the Bible says, I guess this guy God, whoever this is associated with the fact that he's put things up there for signs. Okay, that's astrology. I know religion doesn't tolerate that, but nonetheless, if you have stars in the sky and they're for signs, it's astrology. Scientific, I don't believe in fortune telling, but nonetheless, there it is. Now, Psalm 147, look at verse 4. He, meaning God, tells the number of the stars. So I guess we have the right number. And he, meaning God, calls them by their name. I don't know. See, I'm not an astrologer, I'm not an astronomer. God knows I'm not an evangelist or anything like that. And so, but I do come here on Sunday because this is a church, and I just learned out that God is the one that named these things. And God is the one that said they're for signs, and God is the one that gave them their names and put them where they are, told how many you needed. So we have 12 in the Ecliptic. Who's it say numbered them? It says in the book, he did. And you got 12 in the Ecliptic that are called Taurus, Aries, Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, Sagittarius, Scorpio, Libra, Virgo, Leo, Cancer, Gemini. Who named all that? It says in the book, he did. Now, if it wasn't in the book, then I wouldn't be talking about it. But it is in the book. Now, I told you about every 30 days, the 1/12 of the planets and all the stars and all that move differently, so you have to break it up into 12s. It makes it look like we're on a different sign every 30 days. Why? What effect does that have on you? Does it have any effect on you? Well, that's astrology. We're not allowed to discuss that. Okay, we won't discuss it, but let's see if somebody else will. Go to page 459 and open the book of Job. 459, the book of Job, and look at Job chapter 38. And in Job chapter 38, look at verse 31. Now, see Taurus up here? Right around Taurus. Here's Taurus. See where my finger is? There's a ring right about the neck of Taurus called the Pleiades. Look at Job chapter 38. Look at verse 31. Can you bind the sweet influences of the Pleiades? Can you loose the bands of Orion? Can you guide Arctur? But here's the great one. What are we talking about all morning? We're talking about the 12, how the earth moves so that you can see the sun in the particular sign, the 12 signs of the zodiac. Do you know, I gave you that chart and I said Dendera, which is ancient names of these things. You know what the ancient name of the zodiac is? Mazzaroth. Mazzaroth. And I'll tell you something. You look in I said Christian, C-H-R-I-S-T-I, and you look at a Christian dictionary of the word Mazzaroth. You know what it'll say? The signs of the zodiac. Because I got one. And I know that's what it means. But look what it says in the Bible. Verse 32, can you bring forth Mazzaroth in his season? Who's doing all this? Said in the Bible, they're for signs. Said in the Bible, God named them. Said in the Bible, he put them, the numbers that are there, how many there should be there. It said that they have an influence on you. And it said that God is the one that propels the 12 signs of the zodiac. It's a very complex thing and beautifully engineered, and yet you're led to think that some people in Babylon 12,000 years ago with a toilet paper roll looked through it and said, this is the way it is. That's silly. You know that's silly. You couldn't do it that way. I mean, use sense. So somebody in an advanced race mapped this out. For what? Because God said them. And so where does he live? Does the name 4555 ring a bell? And the name 4555 rings a bell because, what is it? It's a galaxy. It's in the constellation Coma, which is part of Virgo. It's one of the decans of Virgo. It's a mother and child. And it gives a whole new meaning then to the scripture that says, behold, the Lord shall give a sign. A woman shall conceive. A virgin. Coma, mother and child. So that was born out of 45, 55. But look at verse 33 in Job 38. Do you know the ordinances of heaven? Do you know the rules? Do you know how all this stuff works? Well, we learned quite a bit more this morning about how it does. Look, you don't have to look this up, but there's a scripture in which they come up to Jesus and they say to Jesus, what will be the sign of your coming? What will be the sign? What's that? Didn't you read where I read it? It said, let the stars be for signs. What does he say? The sign that you'll get is the sign of Jonah. For as Jonah was in the tomb of the earth, in the bowels of the fish 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man will be in the tomb of the earth 3 days and 3 nights. Certainly. When is the sun in the tomb of the earth 3 days and 3 nights? The winter solstice. When is that? December 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. It's getting ready to happen. When you see that happen, because right now it's getting darker and darker and darker and darker. And what are you waiting for? You're waiting for the sun to rise back out of the bowels of the earth and come back up into the spring and bring all flowers back and the robins back. How are you going to know when that's going to happen? When you see the sun in the sky, in the tomb, 3 days and 3 nights, then you'll know that resurrection's about to take place. And I'll tell you what's going to happen. On December 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, God's Son, the light of the world, will be in the tomb of the winter solstice for 3 days and 3 nights. And on December 25th, he will be born again and rise up to sit at the right hand of the Father and be the Lamb of God that takes away the cold of the winter and brings back the spring. Why is this so hard? Why are you the only people that know this? But you know what? You are. So it's amazing. So that's the sign of his coming. And what did he say? What about the Passover? When will you celebrate the Passover? You Passover every spring. From winter to spring. You pass over from the left hemisphere of the brain to the right hemisphere of the brain. What about the universal cosmic Passover? When the ecliptic crosses the equator at the point where the man with the pitcher of water, what did Jesus say? When you see the man with the pitcher of water. Well, who put this on? Wait a minute now. Who does it say in the Bible put these pictures here? It says that God put them there. He said, let them be for signs. He numbered them. He named them. That means Aquarius was named. And the word Aquarius means a water bearer. He put the sign up there. And what does Jesus say? When you see the man with the pitcher of water. That means he's talking about the sign. The man with the pitcher of water is Aquarius. It's the age that you're living, going into right now. Abraham is going to sacrifice Isaac. But suddenly he finds out a human being doesn't have to sacrifice anything. How come? Because God will provide what? The ram. And who's the ram? Aries. The ram is Aries in the sky, and when the sun consumes that, the burnt offering takes place and we go into spring. The Aries is the pineal gland in the brain, and when the solar plexus energy consumes that, you move to the right hemisphere of the brain, and you go to the springtime of your life. God will provide a ram. The Apostle Paul, look it up sometime, sailed in a ship. You know what it says? Whose sign was Castor and Pollux. Gemini. See? Job and the Pleiades, Arcturus, Orion, Mazzaroth, all of these different things that we've looked at this morning. You know, interesting stuff. So the ordinances, the rules, we've taken a look at how this all works. So for us earthlings, how does the sun become the Lion of Judah to sit at the right side? How does the sun consume the lamb? By the measuring, movement, and turning of the earth. The earth makes that movement, and that makes the sun appear to be in the sign of the ram. And in your meditation, by your meditation, that sun, which is the solar energy, seems to move and move to the right hemisphere of the brain through the pineal gland of the brain. So if the earth doesn't move, the sun doesn't go into the sign. Now, when Mike sent me searching, and I certainly appreciate, you see what one person saying something, and how much you can get. But this is the good part that you maybe come for. He sent me searching. And this is what I want to show you. And this he didn't say anything about here. But we'll look at the face toward you. Okay? Facing toward you, the left hemisphere of the brain, the 10%. And that's the part of the brain that we use, but that we sacrifice in our meditation. When you turn off the 10%, then you're given the 90%, which is the right hemisphere of the brain. And you enter into that, the mystical part. So this part is the visible part. This is the active part. This part is the unseen part. Okay? And tithing that 10% of the left side gives you the 90%, the universal mind. So now, what did we find out? You have 12 cranial nerves. And there are 12 signs of the zodiac. So then we realize that the two are connected. Now, if you have a 10%, the left visible side of the brain, 90% the unseen side, the question then would be, what about the universe? What about the universe? And does the universe have what we have? In other words, are we living? Now just think of this for a minute. Just think very carefully. Just listen to what I'm going to say. Are we living inside of God's brain? Are we living inside of God's head? Do you know all the stuff that's living inside of you? I mean, there are colonies of stuff inside of there. And they're all doing their thing. They're all moving around and they're going to work. They get up every morning, they go to work inside of you. They travel different highways and go different places. Sometimes there's somebody that lives in your knee, takes a vacation and winds up in your elbow. Where were you this spring? Well, I went over to Elbow. What a beautiful place that is. That's to the west. I like to go to the Elbow at the east. Oh, yeah, that's nice. But, I mean, all of this stuff goes on. Everything inside of you is alive, teeming with life. So if that's living inside of you, I mean, anybody could tell you if they open your head, all this is live stuff in there. If there are things living in here, inside of you, what about us, as the little things, living inside of God's head? Absolutely, but I'm going to give you a little more than that. I'm going to give you, where's Joan?
She left you.
Okay. I'm going to give you something from Dr. Gary Toller of the Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, and the General Sciences Corporation of Laurel, Maryland. I want you to take this home with you. Just hold 1 second, Ethel. I want you to take this home with you. This is why it's so exciting to me. We're talking about what I just mentioned here. Are we living in God's head? Dr. Toller, and I have this circled, has used his data as another way to calculate total amounts of visible matter in the universe. These calculations confirm other estimates that 90% of matter in the universe is missing or unseen. Which means that the universe that we see is only 10% of it. You want to do these up? Now that's because Mike told me he had a problem. So I hope he gets more problems. I don't want to wish problems on anybody, but those kind of problems help me to find things. Now you see that. Now you see it with your own eyes, and you realize that you have 10% visible, 90% on the right side, which is unseen, and now you find out that the universe has the same thing. Now, I want to, before we go, and we're done, I want to look at one other thing. If you'll look at one other thing with me, and then you can read that. Would you just look up for a minute and just stay with me for a moment? I want to look at angels, which we know as angles. All right? If you will look at the 1, 2, 3, 4th paragraph down, some of the work he did, the sun's position above the plane of galaxy, you look at the second sentence in the 4th paragraph. It describes how cosmic dust scatters light. Now if you go down to about the 7th paragraph, the new data, get this, will help investigators study diffuse, that means spread in different directions, celestial light sources such as zodiacal light, which reaches Earth after being reflected by nearby dust. So in other words, the light hits the dust and is reflected at a different angle. And one of the interesting things here is that when you talk of zodiacal light, Grolier's dictionary says the sun is encircled by rings or disks of interplanetary dust. One lying in the zone between the orbital paths of Jupiter and Mars has long been known as and is the cause of zodiacal light. So everything then is an angle. Now, if the light comes and is reflected down at a different angle onto the Earth, what do we have? We have light, and we have the angle of reflection. Then we have the angle of light, don't we? Or if you want to be religious, we have the angel of light. Now, if, on the other hand, some dope comes up to you and gives you some wisdom, some enlightenment that bounces off your head, then you have the statement in 2 Corinthians 11:14, which says Satan himself is transformed into an angle of light. So here again, Dr. Toller in this particular thing talks about the way that light, and of course this goes for electrical energy, reaches the Earth, it's reflected, which means it comes out, and it depends. You not only have the light coming down being reflected, you have the energy of the electromagnetic fields coming down at a different angle depending on the month and depending on the position of the ecliptic, and the energy depending on the celestial equator. And so all of this stuff is based on angles. So what does it mean? If this is the mind of God, and the angle of light from his mind to your mind can cause a healing, can cause enlightenment, can cause understanding, as it has for the whole Earth during the time of Aquarius, where we started to understand things. What then, when you learn about this, and learn that this is not awful, what then can you do when the angle of light from your transmitter reaches out to another person and is deflected to another person, which is not a lower angle but a higher angle when you retransmit? In other words, if you go up on the Parkway, okay, or the Turnpike or wherever, you see these big towers. The state police have a command center somewhere, and they send out radio messages. And these big towers that are all the way down are called repeaters. And they pick up the message, and they amplify it, and they send it down to the next one. So if the angle of light or the angel of light comes to you, and then you use this, and you send that out as a repeater to somebody else, once you start to take this seriously, once the world starts to take this seriously, once you begin to understand and you know the ordinances of heaven, you know where this stuff comes from, you know basically how it works, then you can be part of it. And then you can be trusted with it. And then you can be allowed to have it, and then you can use it. But remember the last thing that you take out of this room. There is no Passover if the earth doesn't move. And if you want to sit and read about this stuff, there's no Passover for you. You have to become involved. You have to move. You have to allow by your movement the sun to move into the gland pineal, and then to the right hemisphere of the brain. And then Passover comes to your life, and you move out of the cold winter of your life into the spring, into the summer, and all things become new. So now, basically, that's it. And I think as you go out of here, you're going out with a document that proves conclusively that the brain of the universe is a duplicate of the brain in your head. 10% is visible, 90% is unseen. And can you imagine this? Just think of this. Just think of one last thing. All of this stuff, how beautiful it is, and yet we can only see 10% of it. Can you imagine the beauty of the 90% that we can't see? And who is the great attractor that is pulling us towards it? And where is it that's invisible? So it's interesting stuff, and hopefully we cleared up some areas, and I think I'm mumbling now. Goodbye. Bye-bye. Thanks. Okay.